Marcus Johnson walked through the busy airport with his 8-year-old daughter Emma skipping beside him. He carried her pink backpack over his shoulder while she clutched her favorite stuffed elephant named Peanut. Marcus wore faded jeans and a plain blue t-shirt. His sneakers were old but comfortable. He looked like any other dad taking his child on a trip. Emma bounced with excitement as they made their way toward the private jet terminal. This was her first time flying to Chicago with her daddy for his business meeting. She had packed her coloring books and was already planning what snacks she would eat on the plane. "Daddy, will the plane have those little pretzels like on TV?" Emma asked, tugging on his shirt. Marcus smiled down at his daughter. "Even better, sweetheart, they'll have whatever you want to eat." They reached the gate where Marcus's private jet waited on the tarmac. The sleek white aircraft gleamed in the afternoon sun. Marcus owned this plane through his company, Johnson Tech Solutions. He had worked hard for 15 years to build his business from nothing into a multi-million-dollar success. As they walked toward the plane, Marcus noticed something different. Usually, Amy Rodriguez greeted them at the stairs. Amy had been their flight attendant for 3 years. She knew Emma loved apple juice and always brought extra crayons. But today, a different woman stood at the bottom of the stairs. The new flight attendant was tall with blonde hair pulled back tight. She wore the standard navy blue uniform but looked uncomfortable. Her name tag read, Linda Carter. She held a clipboard and kept checking her watch. Marcus approached with Emma. "Good afternoon. I'm Marcus Johnson, and this is my daughter Emma." Linda looked up from her clipboard. Her eyes moved from Marcus to Emma, then back to Marcus. She frowned slightly. "Johnson?" She checked her list again. "I have a Johnson on here, but..." She trailed off, looking confused. "That would be us," Marcus said with a friendly smile. "Where's Amy today?" "Amy called in sick this morning," Linda replied stiffly. "I was sent from the staffing agency to cover the flight." She looked at Marcus's casual clothes and worn sneakers again. "Are you sure you're on the right flight? This is a private charter." Marcus felt a small knot form in his stomach, but he kept his voice calm. "Yes, we're in the right place. This is our flight to Chicago." Linda's expression didn't change. She seemed doubtful. "I'll need to see some identification." Marcus pulled out his wallet and showed her his driver's license. Linda studied it carefully, comparing the photo to his face multiple times. She then looked at Emma, who was peeking out from behind her father's leg. "And her ticket?" Linda asked. "She doesn't need a separate ticket," Marcus explained patiently. "She's my daughter and she's under 12. Linda made a noise that sounded like she didn't believe him. "I've never heard of that rule on private flights." From inside the plane, Captain Rick Martinez appeared at the top of the stairs. He was a kind man in his 50s who had been flying Marcus and Emma for 2 years. When he saw them, his face lit up with a warm smile. "Marcus, Emma, good to see you both," Captain Martinez called out cheerfully. "Ready for another adventure?" Emma waved enthusiastically. "Hi, Captain Rick. I brought Peanut to show you the new dress Mommy bought him." Captain Martinez laughed. "I can't wait to see it. Come on up when you're ready." Linda watched this exchange with suspicion. She whispered something under her breath that Marcus couldn't quite hear, but it didn't sound friendly. As they climbed the stairs, Marcus felt Linda's eyes on them. At the top, Captain Martinez shook Marcus's hand warmly and gave Emma a gentle pat on the head. "How's business, Marcus?" the captain asked. "Going well, thanks. This Chicago meeting could be really big for us," Marcus replied. Linda followed behind them, listening to every word. She seemed surprised by how the captain treated Marcus, but her suspicious expression remained. Inside the plane, Marcus was impressed as always by the beautiful interior. Cream-colored leather seats faced each other around polished wooden tables. The carpet was thick and soft. Everything was designed for comfort and luxury. Emma immediately ran to her favorite seat by the window. "Daddy, look, I can see the airport trucks." Marcus helped her buckle her seatbelt and stored their carry-on bags in the overhead compartment. He had done this routine many times before, but he noticed Linda watching his every move. "Excuse me," Linda said sharply. "Passengers aren't allowed to use those overhead bins. Those are for crew storage only." Marcus turned around, confused. I'm sorry, but I've always put our bags there. Amy never had a problem with it. Well, I'm not Amy, Linda snapped. And I run things differently. You'll need to move your bags to under the seats. Marcus wanted to avoid any conflict, especially in front of Emma. He quietly moved their bags as requested, but he noticed Linda's tone was unnecessarily harsh. He had flown on many commercial flights where passengers used overhead bins without any issues. Captain Martinez returned from his pre-flight checks and overheard the conversation. Is everything all right back here? Fine, Linda said quickly. Just explaining the rules to the passengers. The captain looked puzzled but nodded. Well, we should be ready for takeoff in about 10 minutes. Make sure everyone's comfortable. As Captain Martinez returned to the cockpit, Linda continued to watch Marcus and Emma closely. She seemed to be looking for any excuse to find fault with them. Marcus tried to ignore her stares and focused on entertaining Emma. He pulled out her coloring books and helped her choose which pictures to color first. Emma was happily chattering about her stuffed elephant when Linda approached their seats. I need to review the safety procedures with you, Linda announced loudly. Even though Marcus had heard the same safety speech dozens of times on this exact plane, he listened politely. But Linda's presentation was different from Amy's friendly explanation. Linda spoke in a sharp, condescending tone, as if she were talking to children who couldn't understand basic instructions. Do you understand everything I've explained? Linda asked when she finished. Yes, thank you, Marcus replied. Linda didn't move away. Instead, she stood there studying them both. This is a very expensive aircraft, she said slowly. I hope you understand that any damage will result in significant charges. Marcus felt his jaw tighten, but he kept his voice level. Of course, we'll be careful. Emma looked up from her coloring book, sensing the tension in the conversation. She moved closer to her father's side. Linda finally walked away, but Marcus could feel her eyes on them from across the cabin. He had experienced this kind of treatment before in his life, but he had hoped those days were behind him. Now, sitting in his own airplane, he realized that success and money couldn't always protect him and his daughter from people's assumptions and prejudices. The engine started, and Marcus felt the familiar vibration that meant they would soon be airborne. He squeezed Emma's hand gently and smiled at her, determined not to let Linda's attitude ruin their trip together. The plane climbed smoothly into the blue sky. Emma pressed her face against the window, watching the ground get smaller below them. Marcus relaxed in his seat, hoping the flight would go better than the rocky start they had experienced. Linda moved around the cabin, checking things that didn't need to be checked. She opened and closed overhead bins. She straightened magazines that were already straight. But mostly she watched Marcus and Emma with suspicious eyes. After 30 minutes in the air, Emma started to get restless. She had finished 2 coloring pages and was getting bored. Marcus pulled out her tablet and headphones. Can I watch cartoons, Daddy? Emma asked. Of course, sweetheart. But keep the volume low, okay? As Marcus helped Emma set up her tablet, Linda appeared beside their seats again. She stood with her hands on her hips, looking annoyed. Excuse me? Linda said in a loud voice. Electronic devices need to be approved by the crew before use. Marcus looked up, confused. I'm sorry, but we've used this tablet on flights before. Amy never said anything about getting approval. Well, I'm not Amy, Linda repeated for the second time. And I don't know what kind of loose rules she might have had, but I follow proper procedures. Marcus felt his patience starting to wear thin, but he kept his voice calm. What do you need me to do? I need to inspect the device to make sure. It won't interfere with the plane systems, Linda said, holding out her hand. Marcus knew this was ridiculous. The tablet was a simple children's device with downloaded cartoons. It had no internet connection during flight, but he didn't want to cause a scene in front of Emma. He handed over the tablet. Linda took it and walked away, making a big show of examining it carefully. She turned it over in her hands, pressed buttons, and even held it up to the light as if looking for something hidden inside. Emma watched with wide eyes. Daddy, why is the lady taking my tablet? She's just checking. Hey, baby, she'll give it back in a minute. But Linda didn't give it back in a minute. She kept the tablet at the front of the cabin for 15 minutes while Emma grew more upset. Other passengers began to notice the situation. A well-dressed woman in a business suit looked over with curiosity. An older man shook his head and muttered something under his breath. Finally, Linda returned with the tablet. "This is acceptable," she announced, as if she had done them a great favor. "But I'll need to monitor its use throughout the flight." Emma took her tablet with both hands and hugged it to her chest. She was starting to understand that the flight attendant didn't like them, even though she didn't understand why. An hour into the flight, Linda began serving drinks and snacks. She approached the businesswoman first, offering her a selection of beverages with a warm smile. She spoke politely to the older man, asking about his preferences and making small talk about the weather. When she reached Marcus and Emma, her entire demeanor changed. The smile disappeared from her face. Her voice became cold and professional. "What do you want to drink?" she asked bluntly. "Could I have a coffee, please?" "And Emma would like apple juice," Marcus said politely. Linda wrote this down on her notepad, like it was a complicated order. "We only have orange juice and cranberry juice available today." Marcus knew this wasn't true. He had seen Linda serve apple juice to the businesswoman just minutes earlier, but he didn't want to argue. "Orange juice is fine for Emma. Thank you." When Linda brought their drinks, she placed them on the table with unnecessary force. Some of Emma's orange juice splashed out of the cup onto the polished wood surface. "Careful," Linda said sharply to Emma. "This table costs more than most people make in a month." Emma's eyes filled with tears. She looked at her father with confusion and hurt. Marcus felt anger rising in his chest, but he forced himself to stay calm. "Accidents happen," he said quietly. "I'll clean it up." He reached for some napkins, but Linda quickly stepped in front of him. "Don't touch anything," she ordered. "I'll handle the cleanup. You people don't know how to properly care for expensive furniture." The phrase "you people" hung in the air like a dark cloud. Marcus felt every muscle in his body tense up. He knew exactly what Linda meant, and it had nothing to do with being careful with furniture. The businesswoman, whose name was Helen Brooks, had been watching the entire exchange. She looked shocked at Linda's behavior and tone. Helen had flown on many private jets for her job, and she had never seen a flight attendant treat passengers this way. Linda cleaned up the small spill with exaggerated movements, making it seem like a major disaster. She used an entire roll of paper towels and sprayed the table with cleaning solution 3 times. "This kind of damage is exactly why some people shouldn't be allowed in first-class environments," Linda muttered, just loud enough for everyone to hear. Emma started to cry quietly. She didn't understand why the mean lady was being so cruel to her and her daddy. Marcus put his arm around his daughter and pulled her close. "It's okay, sweetheart," he whispered. "Don't listen to her." But Linda wasn't finished. As she continued cleaning, she kept making comments under her breath about people who didn't belong and charity cases who somehow got lucky enough to fly in expensive planes. Helen Brooks couldn't stay silent any longer. "Excuse me," she said, in a firm voice. "I think you're being completely inappropriate." Linda turned to face Helen with a fake smile. "I'm sorry if you're uncomfortable, ma'am, but I have to maintain certain standards on this aircraft. The only thing making me uncomfortable is your behavior toward this family," Helen replied. "They haven't done anything wrong." Linda's face turned red. She clearly wasn't used to being challenged by passengers. "I'm just doing my job," she said defensively. "No, you're not," Helen said firmly. "You're being discriminatory and unprofessional." Marcus appreciated Helen's support, but he could see that her involvement was making Linda even angrier. He decided to try a different approach. "Look," Marcus said calmly to Linda. "I don't know what the problem is, but we're just trying to have a peaceful flight. Emma is 8 years old. She doesn't deserve to be treated this way." Linda stared at Marcus with cold eyes. "Maybe if you taught your child proper manners, we wouldn't have these problems." Emma buried her face in her father's shirt, crying harder now. The cabin felt heavy with tension. Even Captain Martinez would have been able to sense something was wrong if he hadn't been busy flying the plane. Marcus held his daughter tight and made a decision. He would endure whatever Linda threw at them for the rest of the flight. He wouldn't fight back or cause a scene, but he also wouldn't forget how she had treated his little girl. Linda walked back to the front of the cabin, satisfied that she had put Marcus in his place. She didn't notice Helen Brooks quietly taking out her phone and checking that it was ready to record if needed. The flight was only half over, but already it felt like the longest trip Marcus had ever taken. The airplane flew through some light clouds, causing a gentle bump that made Emma look up from her tablet. She'd been trying to focus on her cartoons to forget about the mean flight attendant, but the woman's harsh words kept echoing in her mind. Marcus rubbed Emma's back gently. "Just a little turbulence, sweetheart. Nothing to worry about." Linda was at the front of the cabin, organizing supplies that were already perfectly organized. She kept glancing back at Marcus and Emma with that same cold expression. Helen Brooks had been watching Linda's behavior carefully, and she didn't like what she was seeing. Emma finished her orange juice and needed to use the bathroom. She tugged on her father's sleeve. "Daddy, I need to go potty." Marcus smiled at his daughter. "Of course, baby. Let's go." They stood up and walked toward the bathroom at the back of the plane. As they passed Linda, she immediately stepped into their path. "Where do you think you're going?" Linda demanded. Marcus stopped, confused by the question. "Emma needs to use the restroom." "The bathroom is for emergency use only during flight," Linda said firmly. Marcus knew this was another lie. He had used the bathroom on this plane many times before, and so had Emma. Amy had never mentioned any restrictions about bathroom use during flight. "I don't think that's a real rule," Marcus said politely. "We've used the bathroom before on other flights." Linda's eyes flashed with anger. "Are you questioning my authority? I'm the flight attendant on this aircraft, and I make the rules about passenger safety." Emma shifted from foot to foot. She really needed to use the bathroom, and all this arguing was making her more upset. "Please," Marcus said quietly. "She's just a little girl." Linda looked down at Emma with disgust. She should have thought about that before we took off. Proper planning prevents problems. Helen Brooks had heard enough. She stood up from her seat and walked over to where they were standing. "This is ridiculous," Helen said firmly to Linda. "You can't prevent a child from using the bathroom. That's not a real rule on any airplane." Linda turned her anger toward Helen. "Ma'am, I need you to return to your seat immediately. This doesn't concern you." "It concerns me when I see a child being mistreated," Helen replied. "And when I see a flight attendant making up rules that don't exist." "I am not making up rules," Linda shouted, her voice getting louder and more shrill. "I am trying to maintain order and safety on this aircraft." Emma started crying again. The shouting scared her, and she still really needed to use the bathroom. Marcus picked up his daughter to comfort her. "Please just let her use the bathroom," Marcus said, his patience finally starting to crack. "This is getting out of hand." Linda saw Marcus holding Emma, and something in her mind snapped. In her twisted thinking, she decided that Marcus was being threatening by standing up and holding his child. "Put her down," Linda screamed. "You're being aggressive." Marcus stared at Linda in complete shock. "I'm holding my daughter because she's scared and crying. How is that aggressive?" "Don't argue with me," Linda yelled back. "Sit down right now." Emma was sobbing now, confused and frightened by all the yelling. She buried her face in her father's shoulder, trying to hide from the scary woman. Marcus felt his anger rising, but he forced himself to stay calm for Emma's sake. "I'm not arguing with you, I'm just trying to take care of my daughter." "Sit down and shut up," Linda screamed at the top of her lungs. That was the moment when Linda completely lost control. She saw Marcus standing there, holding his crying daughter, and in her mind filled with prejudice and anger, she decided he was being defiant and needed to be put in his place. Without warning, Linda raised her hand and slapped Marcus hard across the face. The sound of the slap echoed through the cabin, like a gunshot. Everyone froze in complete shock. Marcus's head snapped to the side from the force of the blow. His cheek immediately turned red where Linda's hand had hit him. Emma screamed in terror at seeing her father being hurt. Helen Brooks gasped and immediately pulled out her phone. starting to record everything that was happening. "Did you just hit me?" Marcus asked in disbelief, his voice barely above a whisper. He was still holding Emma, who was now screaming and crying hysterically. "You were being threatening," Linda shouted, trying to justify what she had just done. "I felt unsafe. You were acting aggressive." Marcus's entire body was shaking with anger, but he had never felt more controlled in his life. His daughter was in his arms, terrified and crying, and he knew that any reaction from him would only make things worse for her. "I was holding my daughter," Marcus said quietly, his voice deadly calm. "My 8-year-old daughter who needed to use the bathroom." Linda realized what she had done, but instead of apologizing, she doubled down on her behavior. "You people always play the victim," she screamed. "You think you can do whatever you want." Helen Brooks stepped closer, making sure her phone was recording clearly. "I'm getting all of this," she announced loudly. "Every word you just said." Linda spun around to face Helen. "Turn that phone off right now. You can't record on this aircraft." "Actually, I can," Helen said firmly, "especially when witnessing assault and discrimination." The word assault seemed to hit Linda like a physical blow. She suddenly realized the serious legal trouble she was in, but instead of backing down, she became even more desperate and angry. "He was threatening me," Linda insisted. "I had to defend myself." Emma's cries filled the cabin. Marcus sat down in the nearest seat, rocking his daughter gently while she sobbed against his chest. "Daddy, why did the mean lady hit you?" Emma cried. "I want to go home." Marcus kissed the top of Emma's head, his own eyes filling with tears, not from the pain of the slap, but from seeing his innocent daughter so frightened and confused. "It's okay, baby," he whispered. "Daddy's okay. Everything's going to be okay." But nothing felt okay. Linda continued pacing back and forth, muttering to herself about how Marcus had been threatening and how she had no choice but to defend herself. Helen kept recording, making sure to capture Linda's continued hostile behavior. The older man, who had been sitting quietly, finally spoke up. "I saw the whole thing," he said in a grave voice. "That man never threatened anyone. He was just holding his scared little girl." Linda whirled around to face him. "Mind your own business, old man." "This became my business when you assaulted another passenger," the man replied calmly. At the front of the cabin, Captain Martinez was focused on flying the plane and had no idea what chaos was happening behind him. The cockpit door was closed and the engine noise covered most of the shouting. Marcus continued holding Emma, whispering soothing words to her, while his mind raced. He had been discriminated against before, but no one had ever physically attacked him in front of his daughter. The red mark on his cheek was starting to swell, but that pain was nothing compared to seeing Emma so upset. Linda seemed to realize that everyone in the cabin was now against her. Her breathing was heavy, and her hands were shaking. She had crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed, and the weight of what she had done was starting to sink in. But she wasn't done yet. Linda stood in the middle of the cabin, breathing heavily and looking around at all the faces staring at her. She could see the shock and disgust in everyone's eyes. The reality of what she had done was starting to hit her, but she was too proud and too angry to admit she was wrong. "I want this man arrested when we land," Linda announced loudly, pointing at Marcus. "He was being violent and threatening. I had to defend myself." Marcus looked up from comforting Emma, his cheek still red from the slap. "I never threatened you. I was holding my scared daughter." "That's not what I saw," Linda insisted, but her voice was shaking now. Deep down, she knew she was lying, but she couldn't stop herself from digging deeper into the hole she had created. Helen Brooks continued recording with her phone. "The video shows exactly what happened," she said firmly. "And it shows that you're lying right now." Linda's face went pale when she remembered the recording. "Delete that video right now," she demanded. "You can't record people without permission." "I don't need permission to record someone committing a crime," Helen replied calmly. The word crime made Linda even more desperate. She realized she needed help to get out of this situation, so she decided to get Captain Martinez involved. "Captain," Linda called toward the cockpit. "Captain Martinez, I need your help back here. From the front of the plane, they heard Captain Martinez's voice over the intercom. Is everything all right back there? I heard some commotion. We have a serious security situation, Linda called back. I need you to come back here immediately. Marcus felt his stomach tighten. He knew Captain Martinez would believe whatever story Linda told him at first. The captain didn't know about Linda's behavior during the flight, and flight attendants were usually trusted to handle cabin situations. Emma had stopped crying as loudly, but she was still sniffling and clinging to her father. Daddy, I'm scared, she whispered. I know, sweetheart, but everything's going to be okay, I promise, Marcus whispered back, though he wasn't sure if that was true. A few minutes later, they heard the cockpit door open. Captain Martinez appeared at the front of the cabin looking concerned. When he saw the scene in front of him, his expression became very serious. There was Marcus sitting in a seat holding his crying daughter and sporting a red mark on his cheek. Linda was standing in the aisle, looking frantic and disheveled. Helen, Brooks was holding her phone and the older gentleman was shaking his head sadly. What happened here? Captain Martinez asked in a calm but stern voice. Linda immediately started talking, speaking fast and pointing at Marcus. Captain, this passenger became violent and threatening. He stood up in an aggressive manner and wouldn't follow my safety instructions. I felt threatened and had to defend myself. Captain Martinez looked at Marcus, who was still sitting quietly with Emma. He had known Marcus for 2 years, and this story didn't match the calm, respectful man he knew. Marcus, Captain Martinez said gently, can you tell me what happened? Before Marcus could answer, Helen Brooks spoke up. Captain, I have the entire incident recorded on my phone. This flight attendant assaulted your passenger without any provocation. Linda spun around to face Helen. She's lying, don't listen to her, she doesn't know what she's talking about. Captain Martinez held up his hand for silence. Let me understand this situation. He looked at Marcus carefully, noticing the red mark on his cheek and Emma's tear-stained face. Marcus, are you hurt? She slapped me, Marcus said quietly. In front of my daughter. Captain Martinez's eyes widened in shock. He looked at Linda, then back at Marcus. She what? I had to defend myself, Linda interrupted desperately. He was being aggressive. Ma'am, the older gentleman spoke up. I saw the whole thing. This man never raised his voice or made any threatening moves. He was just trying to take his little girl to the bathroom. Captain Martinez felt his heart sink. He was starting to understand what had really happened, and it was worse than he had imagined. Linda, Captain Martinez said carefully, can you explain to me exactly what led up to this incident? Linda's story came tumbling out in a confused rush. She talked about Marcus not following rules, about him being disrespectful, about him standing up in a threatening way. But as she talked, her story kept changing. First she said he had raised his voice, then she said he hadn't. First she said he had moved toward her, then she admitted he was just holding his daughter. Captain Martinez listened with growing horror. He had been flying for 25 years, and he had never heard of anything like this happening on one of his flights. Let me see the recording, Captain Martinez said to Helen. Helen handed him her phone. Captain Martinez watched the video, and his face became darker with each second. He could see Linda screaming at Marcus and Emma, then the moment when she slapped Marcus for no reason at all. When the video finished, Captain Martinez looked at Linda with disgust. Linda, you're telling me this man was threatening you? Yes, Linda insisted, but her voice was getting weaker. Because in this video, I see a man holding his crying 8-year-old daughter and you hitting him in the face. Linda's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. She couldn't think of anything to say. Captain Martinez walked over to Marcus and Emma. Marcus, I am so sorry this happened. Are you both okay? Emma looked up at Captain Martinez with big, scared eyes. The mean lady hit my daddy, she whispered. Captain Martinez's heart broke hearing those words from a child. He had children of his own, and he couldn't imagine how frightened Emma must be. I know, sweetheart. And that was very wrong of her, Captain Martinez said gently. Then he looked at Marcus. What do you want to do about this situation? Marcus was quiet for a moment. He looked down at Emma, then at the red mark on his arm where Linda had hit him, then at Linda herself. She was standing there looking desperate and scared, finally realizing how much trouble she was in. "I want her removed from this flight immediately when we land," Marcus said quietly, "and I want to make sure this never happens to another family." "Captain," Martinez nodded. "That will definitely happen." He turned to face Linda. "Linda, you are terminated from this flight effective immediately. When we land, you will be escorted off this aircraft by security." "You can't do that," Linda protested. "I was just doing my job." "Your job is to ensure passenger safety and comfort," Captain Martinez replied firmly. "You assaulted a passenger and terrorized a child. That is the opposite of your job." Linda looked around the cabin desperately, hoping someone would support her, but everyone was looking at her with disgust and anger. "This isn't fair," Linda cried. "You don't understand what really happened." "I understand perfectly, Captain," Martinez said, "and so does everyone else who witnessed your behavior." He walked back toward the cockpit, then turned around one more time. "Marcus, is there anything else you need right now?" Marcus held Emma closer. "Just to get to Chicago safely." "That I can definitely do," Captain Martinez promised. As the captain returned to the cockpit, Linda slumped into an empty seat, finally, understanding that her career was over and she was facing serious consequences for her actions. But there was still more that Linda didn't know. She had no idea who Marcus really was, or that she had just assaulted the owner of the very plane she was sitting in. The plane began its descent toward Chicago. Linda sat alone in the back, staring out the window and thinking about how quickly her life had fallen apart. She still couldn't believe that everyone was taking Marcus's side over hers. In her mind, she had done nothing wrong. Captain Martinez came out of the cockpit one more time before landing. He walked directly to Marcus and Emma, who were sitting quietly together. Emma had finally stopped crying, but she was still holding her father's hand tightly. "Marcus, I need to tell you something," Captain Martinez said in a low voice. "When we land, there will be airport security waiting to escort Linda off the plane. They'll also want to speak with you about what happened." Marcus nodded. "I understand." "There's something else," Captain Martinez continued. "I called ahead to let the airline management company know what happened. They're going to want to investigate this incident thoroughly." Linda looked up when she heard this. She hadn't realized that Captain Martinez had already reported the incident to their bosses. Her stomach dropped as she imagined trying to explain her actions to the company executives. "Captain," Linda called out desperately, "can I speak with you privately?" Captain Martinez looked at her with cold eyes. "I don't think we have anything to discuss, Linda." "Please," Linda begged, "just give me 5 minutes to explain what really happened." Marcus looked at Captain Martinez. "It's okay with me if you want to hear what she has to say." Captain Martinez walked over to where Linda was sitting. "You have 2 minutes," he said firmly. Linda took a deep breath and tried to make her voice sound reasonable. "Captain, I know this looks bad, but you have to understand the situation I was dealing with. When I got to the airport this morning, nobody told me that these passengers were special guests or VIPs or anything like that." Captain Martinez frowned. "What does that have to do with anything?" "Well," Linda continued, "when I saw them boarding the plane, dressed so casually and carrying those cheap bags, I naturally assumed they were, charity cases or contest winners or something like that." Marcus felt his anger rising again, but he stayed quiet and listened. "I was just trying to maintain proper standards," Linda went on. "People like that don't usually fly on planes this expensive. I was worried they might damage something or cause problems." Captain Martinez couldn't believe what he was hearing. "Linda, are you seriously telling me that you treated passengers badly because of how they looked?" "I wasn't treating them badly," Linda protested. "I was just being extra careful." "You slapped a man in front of his 8-year-old daughter," Captain Martinez said, his voice getting louder. "How is that being careful?" Linda realized her explanation wasn't working. She tried a different approach. "Look, I know I made a mistake with the slapping thing. But he was acting threatening. I felt scared." "The video shows that you're lying," Helen Brooks called out from her seat. "He never acted threatening at all." Linda shot Helen an angry look, then turned back to Captain Martinez. Fine, maybe I overreacted a little bit, but can't we just forget about this whole thing? I promise it won't happen again. Captain Martinez stared at Linda like she was speaking a foreign language. Forget about it? You assaulted a passenger. But nobody was really hurt, Linda argued. It was just a little slap. People are making way too big a deal out of this. That was the moment when Captain Martinez decided Linda needed to know the whole truth. He had been trying to protect her feelings, but she clearly didn't understand how serious this situation was. Linda, Captain Martinez said slowly, do you know who Marcus Johnson is? Linda looked confused. He's just some guy who got lucky enough to fly on a nice plane. Captain Martinez shook his head sadly. Marcus Johnson owns this airplane. The words hit Linda like a physical blow. Her face went completely white, and her mouth fell open. What did you say? Marcus Johnson is the CEO of Johnson Tech Solutions. He owns this aircraft. You just assaulted your boss. Linda turned to stare at Marcus with wide, terrified eyes. Marcus looked back at her calmly. Without saying a word, that's impossible, Linda whispered. He can't be. I mean, look at him. He's wearing jeans and sneakers. Rich people can wear whatever they want, Captain Martinez replied, especially when they're traveling with their children. Linda's whole world was crashing down around her. She had spent the entire flight treating the owner of the plane like he was some kind of criminal. She had called him names, made him move his bags, refused to let his daughter use the bathroom, and finally slapped him in the face. Mr. Johnson, Linda said, stumbling over her words as she stood up. I didn't know. I mean, nobody told me. Marcus looked at Linda with tired eyes. Would it have mattered if you knew? Of course it would have mattered, Linda said quickly. I would have treated you completely differently. Exactly, Marcus said quietly. And that's the problem. Linda didn't understand what Marcus meant. In her mind, rich people deserved better treatment than poor people. That was just how the world worked. I can make this right, Linda said desperately. Just tell me what you want me to do. I'll do anything. Marcus stood up, still holding Emma's hand. The only thing I want is for you to learn that every person deserves to be treated with respect, regardless of how much money they have or what clothes they're wearing. I understand that now, Linda insisted. I've learned my lesson. Please don't ruin my career over one little mistake. This wasn't one little mistake, Marcus replied. This was 2 hours of you being cruel to my daughter and me because of your prejudices. The plane touched down at Chicago Airport with a gentle bump. Captain Martinez announced over the intercom that they had arrived, and that everyone should remain seated until further notice. Through the small windows, Linda could see airport security vehicles driving toward the plane. She knew they were coming for her, and there was nothing she could do to stop it. Please, Linda begged Marcus one last time. I have a family. I need this job. Marcus looked at Linda for a long moment. I have a family too, he said quietly. And you traumatized my 8-year-old daughter because you didn't think we belonged on this plane. Emma tugged on her father's shirt. Daddy, can we go home now? Marcus smiled down at his daughter. Yes, sweetheart. We can go home soon. The plane came to a complete stop and Captain Martinez opened the door. 3 security officers came aboard, along with a woman in a business suit who introduced herself as the airline company's crisis manager. Ms. Carter, the woman said to Linda, you need to come with us. Linda gathered her things slowly, hoping for some last-minute miracle. But as she walked toward the door, she saw Marcus holding Emma's hand and helping her put on her backpack. Emma looked up at her father with complete trust and love. For the first time all day, Linda realized what she had really done. She hadn't just been rude to some random passengers. She had terrorized a little girl and attacked her father, all because of her own ugly assumptions about people who looked different from what she expected. As Linda was escorted off the plane, Marcus and Emma prepared to continue their journey. The incident was over, but its effects would last much longer. Helen Brooks approached Marcus before leaving the plane. I'm sorry you and your daughter had to go through that, she said sincerely. Thank you for standing up for us, Marcus replied. And thank you for recording what happened. 6 months later, Marcus used the incident as inspiration to start a foundation that taught people about treating others with dignity and respect. Emma, now 9 years old, often spoke at schools about the importance of being kind to everyone. And Linda Carter never worked as a flight attendant again.